In several respects, the past 2 years will be remembered as a time of rapid but fundamental transition, including in the area of talent. The theme of this year's Global Talent Competitiveness Index is talent competitiveness in the time of COVID. Many nations, of course, are still in the eye of the storm, as others are now able to reflect on their own response. Certain trends identified in previous GTCIs have been confirmed and accelerated by the pandemic. Digital talent and entrepreneurial talent are but two examples. Questions about the future of work are top of mind for most chief human resource officers around the world. Here to speak with us about this year's GTCI are Bruno Lanvin, INSEAD Distinguished Fellow and co-founder of Portland's Institute, and Felipe Monteiro, Academic Director of the report and a Senior Affiliate Professor of Strategy. Welcome, Bruno and Felipe. Thanks so much for joining us. Bruno, this year's top 10 list of most global talent competitive countries is very much like last year's. Does this hide significant changes elsewhere in the rankings? Did the governments in all top 10 nations react in similar ways to COVID in terms of talent?
Well, in this year's GTCI, Switzerland is again number one, followed by Singapore and the US. Nordic countries and the Benelux complete the top 10. So indeed, there's a lot of stability at the top of these rankings. If we compare average data on a 3-year basis, that is, we compare the period 2016-18 to the period 2019-21, we see that the top 10 remain the same. The only exception being the UK, which dropped 4 positions from 7th to 11th. The Netherlands made it to the top 10, replacing the UK in that ranking. Beyond the top 10, 2 other notable climbers in the top quartile are Germany, which improved its rank from 17th to 12th, which is quite remarkable, and Israel, who improved 6 positions from 25 to 19. France, which entered the top 20 this year, might be following a similar path. While it is clearly too early to fully assess the effects of the pandemic on the global talent landscape, available evidence shows that such effects have been deep and are going to be felt for a long time.
Felipe, how has COVID affected talent competitiveness worldwide?
The pandemic was the strongest shock in the organization of work and talent management our generation has ever experienced. So, as Bruno just said, this is going to have long-term impacts. And I think we have 3 main observations. Number 1, those who had invested in creating a digitally savvy workforce, in developing entrepreneurial talent, and as you said, these were themes of previous GTCIs, they were better equipped to react when the pandemic required everyone to work remotely, require more agility and speed in decision making. So this was super important. And for instance, as new business models emerged and new ways of organizing took shape, entrepreneurial talent was in very high demand. So observation number 1. Number 2, the accelerated adoption of online collaborative tools has redefined the ways in which individuals and teams can bring value to public and private organizations. So some organizations were faster than others in redefining hierarchies, identifying new sources of value, and sometimes even adjusting their strategic objectives. Number 3, some crises, or typically crises, are an opportunity. In some countries, cities, firms took advantage of the pandemic to experiment with novel ways of attracting talent. So we can think about digital nomads, for example, and they test new proofs of concept. Maybe the learnings of those experiments will prove invaluable for the development of new talent strategies. So overall, Rachel, I think this post-COVID talent management will be significantly different to what it was just 2 years ago.
Bruno, the GTCI has warned about talent inequalities in the past. Has COVID deepened these differences, and if so, in what ways? Do you have suggestions for countries to close that gap?
In the emerging post-COVID economy, international inequalities have started to widen again. The World Bank showed in particular that the number of people living under the absolute poverty threshold had increased by some 120 million last year. And this happened after 4 decades of constant diminution. The same is true on the talent scene. In previous editions of the report, we had underlined that most emerging economies were still lacking the digital skills that would allow them to fully participate in the digital transformation of the world economy. The pandemic has emphasized the importance of this skill gap. In many sectors and areas of activity, digitalization has moved from being a priority to becoming an imperative. Across entire global value chains and international companies, the economies that will not be able to accelerate their digital transformation may quickly be left behind. Reduced competitiveness and damages to the education sector have already translated in some key indicators of development, with a visible reduction of life expectancy in Africa and many other parts of the world. Disruptions in schooling have also created a significant and worrying dent in the path of many poorer regions to escape the trap of underdevelopment, especially for girls. There are, however, some encouraging news on the global talent competitiveness scene, as a number of middle-income economies show significant progress and dynamism. Among the countries with the greatest improvements over the two periods mentioned earlier, we can flag Oman, for instance, a country that moved from 55th to 44th, Azerbaijan, 62nd to 45th, Albania, 82nd to 71st, or Indonesia, 86th to 70th, to name just a few.
So Felipe, this year China at 37 and Russia at 45 have joined the GTCI League of Talent Champions. How have other middle and lower income countries fared in this year's GTCI?
Yes, so indeed there were some noticeable improvements for some of the largest emerging markets, notably, as you just mentioned, China, which is now in the top 40, and Russia. Let me also highlight the improvements made by India from 88 to 77 and Brazil from 80 to 75. So these were important improvements. But I think more important than the ranking position this year is to see the evolution over time. So this is the 8th edition of GTCI, which allowed us to look at the data series and create and cluster countries in 4 quadrants. So basically, when you see the report, you see 4 quadrants there. You see the champions, the talent champions, the movers, the laggers, the limpers. And what we see in terms of kind of improvements and changes in those quadrants, first, for the first time, we see both China and Russia, as well as Costa Rica and Malaysia, as talent champions. China's performance was stronger all around. Costa Rica has primarily increased its score in pillars, retain and vocational and technical skills. Both Malaysia and Russia have seen improvements mainly in attract and the 2 output-related pillars. Brazil, which was a talent laggard in our last report, is now closer to becoming a talent mover. There are also fast-growing lower middle-income countries. So the fastest-growing lower middle-income country is Indonesia, which finds itself in the quadrant of talent movers. And another 11 lower middle-income countries are also talent movers now.
So Bruno, this year's Global Talent City Competitiveness Index encompasses 155 cities, but there's been a major shift at the top in the top 20. Can you describe and explain the shift?
Yes, year after year, we strive to improve the GTCI index and its underlying methodology. The same is true for the GTCI, which we use to rank cities. This year, we made one important change by unifying our approach to city-level data. We define now a city by its metropolitan area. Although this decision had been made before COVID struck, it happens to fit very much what happened during the pandemic, when lockdown and confinement measures started to have particularly negative effects on city centers as opposed to the suburban areas. The ranking of some cities have been affected by that, sometimes in a significant way. A major consequence of the pandemic has been to shift the onus and locus of responsibilities and decisions, sometimes with visible consequences on talent flows. In a number of cases, cities had to take new responsibilities, especially in countries where the central governments were slow or reluctant to act. One of the results of this new situation, which is visible in this year's city rankings, is that megalopolises are back at the front of the talent scene. While all types of cities demonstrated their ability to combine creativity, agility, and responsiveness to their citizens' needs, large cities, due mainly to their high level of resources, adapted better to the COVID challenges than smaller ones. This partly explains why they generally rank better in GTCI this year, and why San Francisco, Boston, Seattle, and London happen to be in the top 10.
So one message from the report is how COVID generated a series of shockwaves across the global talent landscape, which will have long-term effects on labor markets. Can you tell us more about this, please?
So maybe I'll start and I'll let you, Bruno, complete. So I think, as we said before, talent management going forward will be quite different from where we were just last year when we launched the report in Davos in January. So what do we see? First, completely new ways of organizing work emerge, and many new possibilities in terms of working from anywhere came up. So I think we believe that most employees want the future of work to be hybrid. So people value safety, quality of life, autonomy, freedom. And organizations will need to offer flexibility and provide different working models. So we believe with the right resources, an important segment of the workforce can be productive and healthy anywhere, whether they are remote, they are on-site, or both. At the same time, we also should acknowledge, that hybrid will not be possible for everyone. So in this post-COVID world, inequalities may grow on sectors of activities, depending on the level of qualification, which should remind organizations and countries and cities how they should create an off-site, an on-site environment, that they will need to reimagine how work will be there. It's also interesting to think that talent mobility within companies, within multinationals, will be different. So, a lot of multinationals now are rethinking their relocation, expatriation strategies. And I think overall, organizations that focus on outcomes and flexibility will probably attract the best and the brightest when you think about talent. And to a certain extent, that same level of flexibility, responsiveness, and adaptability will be expected from countries and cities, which will also need to rethink their talent attraction and retention policies. We speculate that maybe those countries, cities, organizations that took advantage of the crisis and saw it as an opportunity to experiment, to test new ideas, to test new models, may have an edge in this post-COVID world. Bruno.
Yes, so as Felipe just mentioned, this is time for rethinking, and we see how big organizations, private and public, are rethinking their own talent strategies. One of the lessons we can see as a key outcome of the COVID crisis is that governments are back to center stage. Recovery packages will have a significant importance in shaping labor markets and talent competition in the coming years. Faced with a significant threat of economic collapse and social disruptions, governments have been remarkably quick to react and mobilize exceptional resources, mostly through public debt. However, not all recovery packages are shaped in the same fashion. The ways in which resources identified are being spent and attributed will largely influence the ways in which national economies and businesses operate and how different talents will be valued and remunerated in the future. This is generally described as a K-shaped recovery, whereby some occupation will grow, the higher branch of the K, while others will face lower demand, which is the other branch of the K. For example, it is to be expected that health-related talents will be in higher demand worldwide. The emphasis put by some of the largest recovery packages, for instance in the US or in Europe, on green plus digital or on building back better in infrastructure, show that there will be demand already. Temporary gluts may also appear not just in those high-level areas, but also in lower-level segments, as has been demonstrated recently by the difficulties faced in the UK vis-à-vis truck drivers and gas delivery. We should not underestimate the danger that some governments may also be tempted to prioritize the allocation of support towards ailing sectors and activities that concentrate a high proportion of the labor force, as opposed to future-ready organizations and innovative sectors, because social climate and cohesion will be at stake. In the absence of massive reskilling and education efforts generally, recruitment gluts may slow recovery efforts. The growing share of the population that will feel disenfranchised as their qualifications lose relevance may also become a major concern. Educational systems and training institutions will need to adapt quickly to these new objectives and requirements. This will mean giving additional attention, for instance, to lifelong learning and to apprenticeship.
Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.